All right, so today we have two research managers from IBM Research, Petros Zerfos and Hima Patel, and we're here to talk about their new open source project, Data Prep Kit. So Petros and Hima, welcome to the Data Exchange podcast.
Thank you, Ben.
Hi, Ben.
For having us.
Thank you, Ben.
All right, let's start out with kind of high-level basics for our listeners. So I guess, Hima, I'll start with you. At a high level, what does data preparation mean for you folks? So for our listeners, I'm going to start referring to Data Prep Kit as DPK. So Hima, what does data preparation mean in the context of DPK?
Well, DPK stands for Data Preparation Kit. So this is the toolkit so if you are trying to build an application based on LLMs, and if you have new data that you want to get started with, then DPK helps you process this data easily, quickly, efficiently across scales, so that you don't have to worry about your data. You can go ahead, start tuning your model or building a RAG or fine-tuning a model, whatever you may want to, and then thereby go ahead and build your application. So our motto is reduce time to value for an end user who wants to build LLM applications.
So Petros, classically, when people say data preparation in the context of structured data, right? So the things that come to mind are, maybe deduplicate, clean the data. If there's a text field, maybe do some regex and remove some words or characters you don't like. So what are some of the basic things that DPK can do?
Yes, very good question. So DPK, as Hima mentioned, is a toolkit to process raw text from documents in their source document format, whether that is HTML pages or PDFs or what have you, and bring the text in after several steps of cleansing into a stage which is suitable for use in large language models, whether that is for pre-training or even for building applications that make use of RAG, retrieval augmented generation, or fine-tuning, these kind of things. So with respect to the actual processing that takes place, as you mentioned, Ben, it includes various types of deduplication, both the exact and fuzzy deduplication. It includes transforms, as we call them, in order to assess the quality of the text in terms of linguistic quality. It includes operators in order to do filtering based on the source. Certain, for example, documents that come from certain URLs or websites might not be suitable for inclusion into the corpus that you use for the large language model application. You can use the toolkit to detect personally identifiable information, remove hate, abuse, and profanity on the language front. But the DPK itself also includes operators and transforms to process code data, meaning data that are actually source code, programming source code. And you can use it to, remove or actually annotate and remove malware, assess code quality. So essentially do all sorts of operations that are needed in order to go from raw text or source code to a vectorized form, right? Tokens, for example, which is the kind of lingua franca in large language models.
So Hima, drilling down to the PDF example. So as many of our listeners may know, probably at least in the Python space, there's, I don't know, maybe 20 to 30 PDF extraction libraries, right? So you go, here's a PDF. I choose one of these PDF data extraction libraries. I extract the data, and then now I have to chunk it and then embed. So, and so maybe if there's scanned PDFs, maybe I also need OCR, right? So optical character recognition. So what's the coverage of DPK of the things that I mentioned, the PDF extraction, information extraction, OCR, all these things?
Yeah, great question. So DPK can help you read PDFs, so extract the text very, very faithfully. I think that is
Wow.
one of the very important pieces, because there are a lot of libraries, but the full point of faithful extraction is what is important. And this is coming out of years of research that our colleagues in Zurich have been doing. So this is almost coming out of like 5 years of research with a lot of, publications behind all of this work, right? Coming back to your question, it can help you extract text out of PDF. It can help you chunk these into, take the text, make them into chunks, and then also build embeddings, thereby, I think, really getting you started on the whole RAG pipeline.
So Petros, are you, prior to embarking on building DPK, did you folks look into things like, I don't know, unstructured, I guess to some extent, the Llama index ecosystem has, I forget, they have a directory of integrations and things like that that do a lot of the things that you folks are describing. What I like about what Hima just described there is I myself as a developer, I don't have to make too many decisions. I take DPK and I trust that good old IBM research in Zurich has done all of the work to choose the right PDF extraction strategies, right? So in other words, what was the prior art as far as open source projects that you folks were aware of, or you just chose to build DPK anyway?
Right. That's a very good question. There a bunch of toolkits, even in the open source kind of community, that can help with this task. Data Trove, for example, is one well-known kind of library that provides such kind of functionalities. Our kind of starting point was, I would say, kind of manifold. First, one requirement that we had was that this could run on a not necessarily specialized cluster dedicated for data pre-processing for large language models. So we build the DPK in such a way that is cloud native, meaning it runs also in a scale-out fashion on plain good old containers. So you can run it in a very standard kind of cloud infrastructure without necessarily needing a specialized cluster with job submissions and things that make it much more narrow use just for that purpose. Meaning, kind of anyone can take DPK and deploy it into existing cloud infrastructure or even kind of local infrastructure. Hima mentioned that it scales from laptop all the way to a data center, right? So that was one kind of a starting point for us. Another thing is that other kind of open source, primarily libraries on that front, were either specializing on language or on code, so they were somewhat separate. We tried to unify this within a single framework, and you can actually use DPK for both. Another reason for that, for which we embarked on this journey, is that we didn't want to be, in some sense, tied to any particular big data runtime. So DPK itself can run just on pure Python, right? And you have kind of your laptop, just kind of, like your base processor. You can run that. It can run, you can support Ray runtime. So you start going essentially into multi-core into a Ray cluster. We also have support for Spark runtime. So this kind of choice of different, in some sense, runtimes, the ability to scale from laptop all the way to a full data center. And we have actually run it for the purposes of pre-processing, for the pre-training of large language models, not necessarily what happens after your base model is trained. We have run it actually in data center scale type of infrastructure inside IBM, as well as the kind of a cloud native approach. These were kind of compelling, in some sense, reasons for us to essentially go about developing this kit as opposed to just kind of using something from the open source that tend to be a little bit more narrow and required very specific infra to run on. I would say.
This is great. I'm obviously an avid user of Python, but also a technical advisor to both Anyscale and Databricks.
Okay, excellent.
So
So I think we covered all three.
Ray and Spark, we love it in this podcast.
Yeah.
So it sounds like
so do we at IBM.
So it sounds like one of the key decisions is around infrastructure and deployment. But Hima, going back to this question around prior art, at least for language, there seem to be open source projects. I'm not sure if you're familiar, for example, with unstructured.io, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we are.
And so I guess at least for as far as language, I assume you can do more the things that unstructured can do, right? So it can do, for example, HTML, PDF files, and maybe OCR. So one of the things that I wish all these libraries could do is if I have a chart inside the PDF file, can it read the data in the chart? That seems to be much more of a researchy question. So as far as just basic functionality, you can do at the text level what a lot of these open source projects can do. But what Petros is saying, you guys have a lot of flexibility around deployment. Now, there's in the name data preparation kit, obviously preparation, I've drilled down. So let's drill down, Hima, on data. Multimodality. So what's the maturity? It sounds like as far as text, DPK is quite mature, right? So it can handle things for LLMs, all the sources for LLMs. What about the other modalities, images and audio?
Yeah, great question. So we have a lot of content also, or data transforms or data preparation modules also for code modality, right? So think about, all your GitHub repositories having, lots of lines and lines of code. And you need to figure out a way. So when you download a GitHub repository, it actually downloads as a .zip file, right? So now you need to figure out from how to go from that .zip file to what can be fed into a large language model. And that by itself requires a large number of steps, right? So that I think is another place where we have a lot of functionalities to get the code files, put them into reasonable forms that the LLMs can read. Another thing that happens with code is that people fork repositories all the time, right? So you're going to have like a lot of duplicate code. If you just crawl, all of GitHub, you're going to get like large number of duplicate codes, right? So you need to get rid of that. Otherwise, you're going to bias your model towards a certain type of code, right? So that's, I think, another added functionality on the code side. And then you want to be able to do things like find good quality code. Now, this is actually an umbrella, and there can be so many things that can be done under the definition of good quality code. For example, I'll give you an example. When I was learning programming, one of the first assignments that people give is, okay, write this code in C or C++ so that, you can draw the stars on the screen and stuff like that, right? Or people have those kind of things inside their code files, which is basically great for the developer, but these are not useful tokens for the model to learn anything useful from. So being able to clean out all that kind of garbage, right? Sometimes people store models inside code files. Sometimes people store images. All of these are not great tokens to show to the model. So doing all of that cleaning is where I think DPK also shines. right? Yeah, I think so. So we right now major on code and documents. And in future, we hope that, we will go to images, audio, and maybe also we will get the community contributions to, I think, grow DPK in this area.
Huh.
Just
So
to,
for some reason I got confused because I think that somewhere I read that you guys do computer vision and speech, but it sounds like it's code and text.
Yeah,
it's code
I
and
think our
text for,
vision is to get to vision and speech. But I mean, maybe there are the next steps. And if I may, I just wanted to add a small story to what Petros also said, right? We basically, I mean, DPK has been in the open for last 2-3 months now, but we've been working on this for a large number of months now, right? And Petros, a couple of other our colleagues, right? We've actually built these tools because we found that none of the other open source toolkits really, I think, satisfied our requirements. So all of these tools have been built and they have been actually tested extensively because they have been used for building our own Granite models, which are also open source models, right? And then at one point we decided that, hey, this is such a fast moving world. And as we think about fine tuning RAG, every application developer is going to have their own unique requirement. So it's actually a long-tailed problem. So which is also one of the reasons that we decided to open source it, because that is probably the fastest way to accelerate the research and development in the space of data prep for LLMs, and thereby providing a vehicle where the whole community can come together and benefit from each other's work.
Petros, can you talk a little bit about the Ray runtime in particular? So what prompted you to build it and how mature is it?
yeah, it's what prompted us to build this. So Ray is one of the components in actually in the OpenShift AI stack. The OpenShift is the Kubernetes kind of distribution of Red Hat, which we use as the kind of underlying cloud native environment in order to scale out this kind of processing. Actually, this came from our need to process hundreds upon hundreds of terabytes of data for preparing the tokens that went into the pre-training of the Granite models of IBM, which meant that we really needed to use data center scale type of infrastructure in order to run this. So Ray being one of the core components of OpenShift AI, we started building upon that. We have used it to a very kind of a large extent, essentially, spawning hundreds upon hundreds of actors to do kind of parallel processing. We appreciate kind of the lightweight in the middleware sense, lightweight on middleware kind of approach that Ray has. It mostly comes in the form of a library, essentially. And because of the nice integration that it has with Kubeflow operator in OpenShift, that means that we can control the Ray cluster and scale it out accordingly by virtue essentially of using Kubeflow pipelines and Kubernetes essentially automation around it. So this kind of nice integration between the Kubernetes kind of layer and the Ray as a runtime, big data runtime layer is also what led us to actually support Ray from the very get-go. Pretty much all of the operators or transforms, I use the words interchangeably, the terms that we have for language and code do run actually on Ray, and we have, as I mentioned, tested them on hundreds upon hundreds of terabytes worth of data, like really large scale type of data preprocessing. Think of like, easily 8,000 cores, 50 terabytes worth of RAM for processing.
So Hima, it sounds like based on what I've heard so far, the initial target audience are people inside IBM, maybe building LLMs for text and code, right? So your own open weights models, right? So, so in terms of usability right now, if a listener is listening to this podcast, goes to the documentation, is there enough documentation to say, hey, all I have is really 100 PDF files. I'm not going to train an LLM. I just want to do RAG on 20 PDF files. Is there
Yeah.
enough documentation in there to follow?
Yes, I would think so. That I think we
I mean, you
have.
have integrations with some known vector, so because you need to integrate with some vector databases, right? So
That's
Right.
right. That's right. So
we need some dev
have
rel.
a
We need some developer relations to the open source vector database project so that you can land inside their documentation pages, right? So
Right.
That's right.
as an option, right? So yeah.
Yeah. That's right. That's right, Ben. I think you're spot on. Yes, I think we do have a notebook, which is right now up here, maybe coming in the next 2 days into the repository, which takes a developer from an end-to-end RAG flow, right? So it uses the modules of DPK to read PDFs, like you said, hey, 20 PDFs, chunk them, build the text embeddings, put all of them into the Milvus database, and then utilize an LLM to do a Q&A story on it,
And then
which gives an
then
end-to-end flow.
you give people the flexibility to choose whatever LLM
Oh,
they
yes,
want
of
to use at that
course.
Right.
point. Yeah, yeah.
Of course.
So just to add to what Hima just said, in the documentation and the repo itself of DPK, we have essentially various entry points depending on the level of comfort that the prospective user has, ranging from Jupyter notebooks that Hima mentioned all the way to Kubeflow pipeline specifications, right? So as we're kind of like to say with respect to DPK, we try to cover the laptop to data center in one kind of seamless way, right? Meaning that you can run it as easily on a laptop as you do on a data center without having to change anything in your underlying transforms or the pipeline itself. And the different entry points for that, these are all documented in the
So
in the
do you
GitHub
have
repo.
plans? Do
And
you have
also
plans
for
to work with other vector databases? So Milvus is great. I guess the popular ones are Pinecone, Weaviate, right? So and also you folks should look at LanceDB, which is multimodal. So if you're going to go down the multimodal path, that's a natural thing. But it seems like the natural thing for you to do is to approach these vector search communities and make sure, hey, we wrote this little thing. Can you put this in your docs, right? So
yeah, I
Right.
think that's a great suggestion.
The DPK itself is, if I may say, kind of indifferent to the actual vector database that is used. It's modular enough,
no,
basically,
it's just, this is more like a
support any.
distribution, so that
Right, exactly.
to
It's more
raise
of a distribution.
to raise awareness about
Right,
DPK,
exactly.
right?
And
Because
that's a very
they
good point.
have their own communities, and their communities will discover you,
Yes,
right?
makes
So,
sense.
Very well said.
so let's see. So at this point, who is using DPK outside of IBM? So what's the evidence that this thing is?
Well, it's very interesting. We've had, open source developers commenting on our issues and saying, hey, can I work on this issue? So we actually have a couple of transforms that have been contributed by the open source community. And I'll give some examples. We have a transform around header cleanser in the code file. So remember when we have code files, there typically is like, license and, that kind of information, which is again not useful for the LLM. And we've had a contribution from the community where someone has written this module that can get rid of it, that works across a variety of languages. Then we've had another open source contributor who we actually met in one of our talks, and she got interested, and she's made a contribution to remove PII information, or basically mask the PII information, right? And then I think we have a few other people from the open source community contributing more to it. So we are excited to see, how the community uses it, contributes back to it. I think it's going to be an interesting journey for us, but a lot more to do. But I think we've had traction with a couple of PRs being raised by community other than ours, or our friends and family, which tells us that, okay, other people are also finding it useful. Other people want to make contributions. Which is interesting. Actually, on that note, if you don't mind, I'd like to, I think, maybe suggest another or share one more point. So Petros did talk a lot about, right, Ray and Kubeflow and all of this, right? But we have built a special feature into DPK, which allows a developer or a data scientist, they don't need to know Ray or any of that, right? Which we thought could become an obstacle for anyone contributing into our toolkit. So we've actually built a framework, and all you need to know is your business logic or code, which you can write in Python. And then we have a framework where you can just go and put that Python code or logic, and you could just get for free all the other nice things around Ray and scalability and all of that. So I think that's an interesting feature which I feel will help developers make easy contributions into the toolkit, and thereby get like a lot of worth of scalable modules that they can use back for their own work.
Now, I assume based on what Petros described, that if I'm used this whole notion of from laptop to cluster, right? So that if I'm using DPK on my laptop and I decide, hey, I need scale, I'm going to go to the cluster, there's very, very minor code changes that I have to do, right? So, I mean,
ideally, there's no code changes.
Me as a developer will probably not change any of my code, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so
basically, just want to add a little bit to what Hima said. Basically, the data prep kit is, in some sense, you can think of it as two things. One is the kind of core framework libraries that you can use in order to transparently scale out your code, either on Ray or on Spark, along with other very nice and desirable properties, such as, for example, checkpointing. I mean, when you have like 100 documents, as you mentioned, probably you don't care about things blowing up on your laptop. You just simply run it. If you run jobs like for a few days, which we have run on more than 100 billion documents, then something blowing up midway is something that you very deeply care about. And at that scale, things actually do blow up. So for example, checkpointing is something that you would get for free without having to write a single line of code. By using the framework libraries of DPK. The other part of DPK is also the transforms, right? So DPK in some sense is two things. Framework libraries to go from laptop to data center, along with checkpointing and all these things and the scale out, and transforms of the types of doing cleansing or annotation, assessing quality, personally identifiable information, hate abuse, profanity, malware, all sorts of things, both on code and language. So DPK is these two kind of major components.
Yeah, no, I mean, this project, I had actually not heard of it, right? So until my friend pointed me to it. It sounds very promising and exciting. I would say that you folks probably need to kind of invest more in developers and developer relations. And particularly, I think, even though you started out with people who are pre-training models in mind, set that aside and kind of assume people might start with little data,
Right.
right? So and then you have the nice thing about your tool is I may start with little data, but then as I get more comfortable with DPK, I can scale more and more. But that persona of someone starting with little data is very different from the persona who's pre-training. So
No,
Right.
I
you
agree,
may
Ben.
you may really need to kind of invest in your documentation to target that persona, right? So
That's something that we've already started
and
doing.
relationships
Yeah.
with existing open source projects, right? So
Exactly.
yeah.
That's right. That's right, Ben. And I think while we started this for our own pre-training needs, the open source project is meant for people who want to build LLM apps, right? So not really people who are trying to do pre-training, but really targeted for those personas. And we thought that so how does someone start thinking about such toolkits? Or, okay, if I'm starting a new project, okay, I want to quickly build a POC. In that case, I'm just working with like 100 documents. Okay, great. So that's why we have Python runtime also, where you can just work with and quickly build your POC with 100 documents whatsoever. Now that you have your POC working, and then let's say if you're in a company, someone is going to expect that, oh, now can you actually take this into a production use case? And that's the time when that 100 documents may become 10,000, right? Or something of that order, right? Now, 10,000 documents, even on a laptop, is going to take some time, or a virtual machine, or so on. So that is where I think the whole scalability aspect we believe will help these developers, right, to take the code, whatever they have used to build a POC. Okay, now we can move into a production use case very quickly without having to invest a lot of time and energy to make it into production scale, right? Because the core logic across the transforms is the same. We just help you to scale it out very easily, right? So I think that's I think one of the big points, and this also comes from our own experience, where a lot of AI projects, Gen AI projects, or in the previous world, the data science projects, they would all, I think, be great POCs, and then somewhere get stuck there because there has been a challenge in identifying the ROI out of that project, or the POC is done quickly within 2 weeks, but then it takes like 8 months to get it into production, and then everyone starts getting uneasy about it, and the expectation setting is not done well, right? So I think we are also trying to avoid that problem here, where you say, hey, if you are into a POC stage, then we are also going to give you the machinery that's going to help you put it into production very, very easily. Of course, as long as, and maybe there will be some false start POCs where you say, okay, hey, this is great. It's a nice, cool, cute idea, but really we don't know how to get, a company might think we don't know how to get any ROI out of it. Okay, then fine, that project can be killed, and it would have taken that 2 weeks, but we provide the transforms and the ability to the user to, one, I think, get maximal things done out of those 2 weeks, and use the Python, runtime at that point of time just to build a quick POC.
Yeah. The challenge for you folks, as I mentioned earlier, is there's existing open source projects that developers start with, and they probably, as Hima points out, they get frustrated. But the fact is that they discover these projects mainly through these projects being embedded in, the documentation of these vector database companies and whatever, right?
Right.
So you need to probably do the same thing, is to embed yourself into those docs so that you become one of the first things they try, and then they probably will stick with you.
That's a good idea.
That I completely agree. In fact, I think we are raising a PR onto the Llama recipes repo anytime now. Maybe someone is raising a PR as we speak, right? Because we know that people go to the Llama recipes repo, to see how to use the Llama models, right? And we hope that they will discover DPK there as a way to do data preparation. Similarly, we are also raising a PR very soon on the Granite recipes repo, again with the same intent that people will go to this repos to see how to use these models, and they'll be able to find easy code to DPK, which will help them, get ahead with their data preparation. But your point is very valid, Ben. I think there's a lot more we can do in this space, and that's something that we want to do in the next couple of months.
What's the license?
Apache 2.0.
Apache 2.0.
Nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very
And then
permissive.
it's backed by IBM, so it's always going to be open source probably, unless some of the members of the team decide to do a startup, which I'm not encouraging, right? So
Not a
so
suggestion.
the problem with some of these open source projects in the data side of generative AI is they do become companies, and then suddenly now you got this tiered system, right? So we have these things in the open source. Well, maybe they don't have all the features, or maybe they don't scale, right?
Right.
Or scaling may be difficult. The easiest way to scale these things is to go to our cloud paid version, right? So in your case, it sounds like the Ray runtime is easy to use and just as easy to manage.
Right.
So it seems like it's a win for users who want to grow into or use a project they can grow into, right? So, because as Hima points
Right.
out, a lot of these projects are great when you're kind of just playing around, but then you discover I can't really grow into this project. It's not robust or rigorous enough. So, okay, so what's coming for DPK? So we talked about other data modalities, right? So that might be in the works. We talked about improving developer relations and,
Relations.
and documentation. By the way, this is one thing that open source projects always underestimate, the importance of documentation, right? So
Right.
documentation is almost as important as the project itself if you want to grow the project, right? So what else?
Sure.
What else is on your massive to-do list in the next 6 to 12 months?
Come on, take a step.
Yeah, great question. Well, I think a couple of things, Ben, right? We do want to get into multimodal, like we've seen. What we also want to do is, I think, double down on a few important use cases like RAG and fine-tuning to also hear from the open source community what are the gaps that they're seeing. We also want to see where the open source community is getting excited about.
I can tell you one thing.
Mhm.
Please.
Have you heard of this thing called GraphRag?
Yes.
Graph, right? Yeah.
I assume now, because you folks are the all-powerful, all-omniscient IBM research, that somewhere in worldwide IBM research, there are people working on
Graph, right.
automatic knowledge graph construction.
Yes.
So
Yes,
then you can take some of their work and then put it into data Bucket. Hey, we can not only prepare your data for whatever RAG application you want, but we can give you a basic starting knowledge graph that you can improve upon based on years and years of IBM research.
Research, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah, I mean, I
There's
think
got to be someone in IBM research working on automatic knowledge graph construction.
We have
absolutely,
a person or
absolutely.
two in mind.
Yeah. And then so here's my text. You get a basic knowledge graph, and then now you're playing also in this graph rag space, which is becoming
Quite
hot, right? So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what?
Document understanding is, if I may add to what
Yeah.
Hima mentioned, and emphasize a little bit the multimodal aspect beyond text and code. Document understanding is something that we feel there's lots of applications and lots of interest on, namely understanding not just the text inside the document, but also the graphs that are included inside the document, the images, the tables, and essentially managing to put all these things in the context of the document. lots of applications, for example, for document QA, essentially entering into a dialogue with the document, ability to extract information from places that are not easy to reach, for example, from inside tables, and do actual kind of reasoning on such kind of information that has been extracted either from tables or from graphs, or even from embedded UIs. For example, the ability to understand screenshots. So there's some kind of interesting multimodal type of applications with an emphasis on document understanding that we're very much interested in, actually. And I would say that would be a very nice kind of future path for the data prep kit to grow on.
One thing I forgot to ask. So I asked about multimodality. I forgot to ask about multilingual. So I'm sure multilingual in the case of code for sure. But what about multilingual in the case of languages?
So
it already
we do have a transform today that can help you detect what language the text is written in. So that already exists in terms of multilingual capabilities for
How good,
language.
in other words, how good is it at processing non-English PDF files?
It's pretty good. The data prep kit itself is not tied to any language. So long as the individual transforms are able to handle other languages. For example, we have a transform that assesses linguistic quality, what is called as document quality. There's an underlying machine learning model that does that. It's a classifier, basically. And there are versions of that model in English as well as in other languages. For example, like Spanish and French and what have you. The data prep kit itself supports that very well. So I would say that we have used it actually in order to prepare data for the multilingual versions of Granite. So
I'm assuming to run DPK at scale, I don't need to buy 1,000 H100 GPUs, right?
no, right? No,
This can run CPUs, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Yes, it can consume a very large number of CPUs, but it doesn't mandate the use of GPUs. That's correct.
Yeah. And with that, thank you, Hima and Petros. And for our listeners, I'll definitely put a link to DPK, and I'll actually try to write about this for my newsletter. First, I have to use it, and in order for me to use it, this is the test for you folks. And you can tell me when it's the right time to do it. I will follow your docs carefully.
Absolutely.
If
That's the way it
docs,
should be, actually.
if the docs fail me, I usually give up on a project. So just
Yep.
tell me
Fair
when
enough.
it's time for me to try the docs.
Fair enough.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ben, for having us
Thanks
over.
very much, Ben.
Very, very interesting conversation. And thank you also for your tips to, I think, broaden ourselves into the developer community. We'll look forward to doing that in the next couple of months.
All right.
Thank you very much, Ben.